It is a joy and a privilege to be with all of you. And should you ever find your way to Connecticut, we would love to see you at the Meeting House. Perhaps I'll share a little bit more about that later. But for now, I want to invite us into a dwelling space from which we might then spend some time with God's Word and our own respective journeys. So I invite you to settle in. If you're seated in a chair, you might want to put both feet firmly on the floor. If you've come in with stuff that you're carrying, perhaps you want palms down in your lap in an attitude of releasing. But if you're already settled, perhaps it's palms up. And with the psalmist, let us receive God's invitation to be still. The psalmist invites us. Be still and know that God is God. To be still and know. To be still and be. So, thank you again for the privilege of being with you all today. As I think about all of you in DC and the surrounding area, and my time not only in working on my Doctor of Ministry at Wesley Theological Seminary, but when I was at the Corcoran Gallery of Art, curating shows, I'm just reminded of how you really are at the epicenter of everything. And it is both a special place and a challenging place to be. So as I was thinking about the invitation of now, I began to think about the chaos that I know many are experiencing. I have a number of good friends who teach at George Washington University and others who are still working in the city. So I want us to just dwell with these early verses in the creation narrative and perhaps set them in a somewhat new context. Because for me, I always felt that Genesis began with in the beginning. But in fact, it begins, if we read it carefully, not with God's creating it until verse 3, but with chaos. So let me read those first verses again. When God began to create heaven and earth, and the earth was without form and void, in Hebrew, tohu, wa, bohu, and darkness over the deep, telhom, God's breath, ruach, hovered over the waters. Tohu, wa, bohu, without form and void, chaos. I'm going to invite you to take a moment and locate the word chaos in your own experience. Perhaps you're dwelling in chaos right in this moment, or perhaps there have been other moments in your life that you get pulled back to when you hear the word, or that you're anticipating. But take a moment to locate the word in your life and in your experience. What have been the chaotic moments or events that have shaped your life? What role has chaos played? What creation has emerged out of it? As I've been dwelling with this, tohu, wa, bohu, the chaos as the ground out of which God created, I've thought it would be so much simpler if God had begun with simply, let there be. Let there be light. Let the firmament be separated. Let there be land. But there it is in the first two verses of the first chapter of Genesis, before any creative words by God are spoken. There's tohu wa bohu. there's chaos without form and void. And so Elohim, God, broods over this unformed depth. At the very moment of creation, the Ruach, the breath of God, is vibrating upon the face of the chaotic depth. Rashi, a 10th century rabbi, translates the verse as follows. At the beginning of the creation of heaven and earth, when earth was without form and void and there was darkness, it was then God said, "Let there be." Rashi's argument is that the beginning is a subordinate clause to the act of creation that begins when God speaks in verse 3. It seems that chaos is the raw material out of which creation emerges. Yet, as I've been pondering the chaotic times in which we live, it seems to me that chaos is seldom pleasant, that too often it is associated with things falling apart, with confusion and with destruction, with people's jobs being ripped away from them, with flooding taking devastating numbers of lives away. We dwell in a time of deep chaos. But it's also a time of emergent possibility. And so it sent me back to Genesis to ponder, have we misunderstood the void and the deep, the tohu, wa, bohu? Have we feared it in a way that we fear our own unconscious? How often do we avoid the depth of our unconscious because it doesn't subject itself to our control? It doesn't follow the patterns of our conscious logic. And if God is only perceived from the perspective of the conscious self, then we might imagine a God who is at least ultimately in control, not a God in relationship with chaos, but a God as ordered and civilized and self-sufficient as we like to think of ourselves. But God is more than our conscious frameworks. God is more than what is known and ordered. And our God is inviting us into the present unknown, the unordering and unforming and dissolving and taking apart. And with it, God is inviting us into the unpredictable and the unconscious so that we might perhaps co-create the new. I think it's important for us to dwell with the reality that God, in this passage at least, shows no aversion to chaos. Rather, there seems to be this mysterious attraction, even a playful relationship with chaos, out of which creation is made possible. Here, creation doesn't begin with self-sufficient power or authoritative words, but with a hovering of the breath of God. And it is out of that that the possibilities begin to emerge. Tohu, wa, bohu, a poetic echo into the silence, elusive messages drifting, unlikely possibilities awakening, signifiers rearranging. And with each repetition, the surface grows more unstable as possibilities vibrate. What might be nothing, murmurs of what might yet be something. And within the formless void, patterns begin to emerge. This is what science teaches us, that creation is not the result of an enforced design, but a willing response to divine invitation, if we are to learn from Teilhard de Chardin and others. There's a deep, deep pattern within the chaos, as Meg Wheatley's work has shown us. And it is into this chaos that God speaks. And it is so. God's voice is not in conflict with the formless void. It does not violate the chaos. Rather, it gives voice to its yearnings and draws forth its beauty. And so, in the first 5 days of creation, word and creative act flow together. And God said, and it was so, and a new order begins to emerge from the chaos. So, my question to us is, if this primal chaos is not evil, not an enemy of God, but rather part of the process by which God creates, then this passage has great relevance to our present lives. For none of us began or dwell in a perfectly ordered and tranquil world. Neither is our internal world without chaos, if we're to be honest, but it's in the middle of the mess, in the heart of chaos, that God does God's best work. In the midst of darkness, there is a light that has not been snuffed out, a grace that keeps pouring itself out into our existence, that grace known by the name love. And if we listen, we can hear the whisper of love saying, something truly new and beautiful is possible for you and through you. This formless abyss, this chaos, can swarm with the invitation of new life. The illogical fragments, the residue of uninterpreted messages and represented desires can be brought together in meaningful fulfillment. For me, the call to embrace tohu wa bohu came as a summons. It was 2015, and I had brought my entire team to Cape Cod to an MIT Presidency Institute retreat. We were seated in this conference room that looked out over Cape Cod Bay. There were about 75 of us gathered from about 14 nations. We were being guided through a meditation in which we were journaling and reflecting. And then we were invited to stand, eyes closed, and to take one step, one embodied step into the emergent future that we were being called into. The challenge is that I didn't simply step, I walked. I walked straight out the door and nearly into Cape Cod Bay before I came to myself. And it was that day that I received a call to step into the chaos, to step out of my very safe, very ordered life as a Presbyterian with oversight of 94 congregations and 32,000 souls and a very nice salary, to return to working from the ground with people to explore new forms of consciousness, new expressions of spiritual community, new ways in which we might bridge the epidemic of loneliness, nurture holistic well-being, be attentive to regenerative practice, and accountable to wise leadership. It was a moment that shifted me out of a job, a call, to be fair, to vocation. I didn't know the how in that moment, and I didn't yet know the who that I would be working with, but I knew the when, and it was in that moment. So I returned to Chicago, where we were living at that point, and I gave notice. And I stepped away from a six-figure salary and a lot of prestige and power. My husband was remarkably calm about it. He had seen my growing frustration with institutions stuck in survival mode, failing to evolve in ways that truly served the needs of the 21st century. And despite all the rhetoric around transformation, actual change was rare. Our current systems weren't designed for the world in which we now inhabit. What we needed was not incremental improvement, but a radical reimagining, new ways to create together. Now, there's significantly more to my story, and the last 7.5 years have been spent in a place that we call the Meetinghouse, a place to gather, grow, and flourish. We work locally and globally, and we're committed to the three pillars I just named: holistic well-being, regenerative practice, and wise leadership. And in our work together, we have looked at a formational journey, finding its root word in the Greek morphao, in which the root of our word, metamorphosis, can be found. Understanding that there is a deep letting go before we can take hold of the new. And rarely, indeed, I would vouch to say never, are we fully prepared for what that letting go will require of us. But I will tell you this, I wouldn't change a thing. We are in a vulnerable place as a congregation and a community innovation hub, but we're also in an exhilarating place as we find ourselves in the privileged position of being able to gather community to make a difference on the ground in this time and in this place. There's a Hebrew midrash that says, God made everything a bit incomplete so that we might participate in the action of creation. And so I want to invite you to receive the invitation to dwell in the chaos, to not resist it when you encounter it in your life, but rather to sit in the discomfort and to ponder in your life and in your work and in your relationships and in the movement of God's Spirit in your midst. What is dying and what is seeking to emerge? How will you enter the void, the tohu wa bohu, that a new creation might emerge? I'm going to return to the poem that was so beautifully read, to just read it again as an inclusio, a bookend, if you will. May it be a blessing to you. To all that is chaotic in you, let there come silence. Let there be a calming of the clamoring, a stilling of the voices that have laid their claim on you, that have made their home in you, that go with you even to the holy places, but will not let you rest, will not let you hear your life with wholeness or feel the grace that fashioned you. Let what distracts you cease. Let what divides you cease. Let there come an end to what diminishes and demeans, and let depart all that keeps you in its cage. Let there be an opening into the quiet that lies beneath the chaos, where you find the peace you did not think possible, and see what shimmers within the storm. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Deborah, for that beautiful and poetic message.